Welcome back to the Foundation in C# course. We are currently in Module 9, and this lesson we're going to be covering Planning Step L. So this is the logic design step. So let's move right to the homework, which is to identify and think through any tricky bits of logic. Again, not going deep here. Think big picture, not small details. Figure out if you don't know how to do any part of the app. So you're going to think through and say, okay, how is this going to work from a macro perspective? Okay, we're going to have a web app and a WPF app, both .NET Core. Do I know how to do those things? Do I know how to capture information from a web app? Do I know how to display information in a web app or a desktop application? Do I know how to connect to SQL from a class library or from C# code? Those are the big things. So think through the big parts of your application. I don't want to do your homework for you, but think through the big parts of the application and think through if there's any tricky bits. Okay? And then if you find some, then go ahead and research those. So that's your homework. Go ahead and do that, and now pause the video right here. Okay, I'm going to assume that you've paused the video, you've gone, done your homework, and now you're back to see how I would do it. So let's go over to OneNote again. So let's create a list right here. So I'm going to change my font size to 18. And this is a list of tricky bits. Okay, this is our application. Here's the things that we need to think through. ASP.NET Core Razor pages. Do you know how to do those? And then underneath there, form capture. Displaying lists of info. Link with data. So when they click, I want to reserve this room, it's going to have to send that room to the confirmation page or the booking page. Multiple pages. All right. And then talking to SQL. Those are the bits for Razor pages probably. And then in WPF, it's a WPF core application. So you need to know WPF core. Do you know how to create a WPF core application? Do you have .NET Core 3? If you don't, you can't do a WPF core application or Core 3.1. So you can go 3 or above. All right. So now let's talk about WPF. Well, do you know how to capture form information? Display lists of information. Maybe the data grid. All right. List of buttons. So you're going to have a button for each entry. So if you search for last name of Corey, and maybe there's 3 Coreys checking in today. One's Tim, one's Charity, and one's John. Okay, well, then it's going to have 3 different listings. Each one of them will have a check-in button next to it. How do you do that? Do you know how to do something like that? Okay, so that would be something to think through. Do you know how to do? And then also how to talking to SQL. Now let's talk about SQL itself, because you have to know SQL Server. So create a database. Create tables. Create CRUD queries. Okay, so we have to have CRUD meaning create, read, update, and delete. Do we know how to do those things? So those are the tricky bits. And then we also have to have some kind of pre-population of data. Think about it. When your application starts, it'll have no rooms. That doesn't seem right. You probably want to have some rooms in there and room types. So we're going to have to pre-populate data in our SQL server. So how you do that and do it well. Now, one more that we haven't really talked about, but is deploying stuff. Okay, so ASP.NET web app. WPF, desktop app, and SQL Server or SQL database. So how you deploy this stuff. Now this is a minimum viable product. We're not going to do a full build cycle, a full deployment cycle. We're not going to bring in Azure DevOps and have this whole system. We probably won't even use source control for this because it's just the bare minimum. I don't want to confuse you with extra stuff, but we need to know at least how to get this stuff installed somewhere, because so that would probably cover that. SQL Server, we did a lot of stuff with SQL Server in Module 8 on data access. Deploying stuff, we haven't done a ton there, but we talked about all of these things, at least the simple deployments. Okay, and that's all we're going to do is simple deployments. So right-click Publish, or just run it right in Visual Studio, and then we'll also see how to just run it in Visual Studio or also launch it with just the exe. We'll see how to do that. And the SQL database, how to publish that by right-click Publish. As far as talking to SQL, we've seen how to write the class library code to do that, and then how to talk to that class library code. So that's putting a few things together from Module 8 and also Modules 4 and 6 on object-oriented programming. So we'll deal with some of those things as well. And then, of course, there's some basics that, like from Module 2 with basic syntax, and then also Module 3 will probably get in some debugging as well. So it's just, we kind of touched on all these different modules. We're going to pull in different pieces of them. So we've learned all these different, I call them Lego bricks. If you've ever played with Legos, you find these different pieces and then you put them together in new and interesting ways. And that's kind of what you do with Legos. Well, that's what we're doing with our code as well. We've learned all these different pieces. Now this project is putting them together in new and interesting ways. But we have to make sure that we know about all the pieces. And this kind of breaks down at a high level the big pieces we're going to have to work with. Can you capture data from an ASP.NET Core Razor Pages application? If you can't capture data, then the rest of this stuff isn't going to be that helpful, because that's one of the major foundational pieces we need in order to accomplish our MVP. So make sure you learn how to do that. Use a test project. Don't just create this real project and then do test stuff inside of it. Because tests, you often forget one or two pieces of code when you pull it back out, and then you have test code lying around, and that's what causes bugs. Okay, so we don't want to do that. With that, I think we've covered all of the steps we need to, or all the pieces we need to for the logic design step. Pretty easy as far as what we need to go through. I think we've covered everything we need to, so we're not going to belabor this step. We've got what we need. Now we'll move on to the last step, which is data design. So that's what's coming next in the next video.